Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be showing you how I made this paper cut art piece. For this project, I was kind of inspired by the journey to the center of the earth. I wanted to create like a tunnel that leads to the center of the earth. Yay! And I would have this explorer character that is journeying to the center of the earth. I wanted it to have like a magical little twist. So it's going to be like a magic tunnel where things grow and it's cool. So that's kind of the basic idea, and I did this sketch. I wanted to add some like underwater kind of plant life, so I'm going to have all along the bottom these like bubbly leafy plants going up, and I'm going to have some vines and moss and things coming down from the ceiling. And I'm excited about this because I think it's going to be very cool, because I'm planning on using a lot of layers for this. I think I marked it and there's 15 layers. So it's going to have a lot of depth and it's going to look really cool. But yeah, that's what I'm going to be doing today. Before we get into it, I just wanted to share some updates that I have on my Patreon. I have my templates up, of course, but I'm also starting a series over there where I go over tips and tricks that I like to use when I make my paper cut stuff. Part 1 is up right now, and it is all about the different types of paper I use and why I use them. I also decided to put the long version of the stories you hear in my videos up on the Patreon. So if you're interested in hearing the full version of this story and upcoming stories, then please check out the Patreon as well. Alright, so starting this project was really easy. Since I did a decently thorough sketch, I liked how all of the layers looked on this, so I kind of just have to copy them over onto the actual cardstock layers. And I'm just really working on defining the plans so that I can cut them out easier. And after I draw out all of the layers, I go to cut them out. I just use my X-Acto knife, cut along the shapes of the leaves, and basically just cut all the line work. This part was actually pretty annoying. It was very tricky to get the bubble shapes right. I had slipped into the belly of the earth. At first, the crack I had to squeeze through was the size of the bathroom window of my house back home. At first, I seriously believed I had been given the wrong coordinates, and the missing professors and scientific expedition leader, Mr. Samuel Brown, was not in the area he was thought to be. Quickly, after I had squished myself through the narrow opening of the cavern, the space opened up around me, and now I had a whole room-sized cavity to move around freely. I breathed out a sigh of relief and stretched my back, which was aching badly from slumping for so long. However, the joy at the end of my claustrophobic environment was short-lived, because the next moment I spotted the soiled, gory boot lying disparaged in the middle of the path, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. As disgusting as the boot was, I tried to convince myself that this was indeed a good thing. Even though things aren't looking too good for Dr. Brown, I was closer to locating him, and if I were to hurry, he might still be alive when I got to him. Since Dr. Brown was most likely bleeding to death at the bottom of this cavern, I turned my attention to the long path that lay in front of me. The cavern around me was so deep that I couldn't see the bottom. There was a thin layer of vegetation covering the floor under my feet, so the plants swished around my shins as I walked. There was a small path leading down through the winding tunnel, made out of speckled, shining little rocks. Surrounding the path on either side were tall, branching, bubbly-looking plants, so as I ventured down the path, it felt like I was going underwater. I kept climbing down into the belly of the earth for what felt like forever. At one point, I got so bored that I shouted into the darkness just to hear my own voice travel back to me. As I marched through the suffocating darkness with nothing but the beam of my flashlight to cut through it, I had to hunch over to avoid hitting my head on the jagged rocks that jutted out from the ceiling. I shone my flashlight up at them so I could get a closer look. They were quite beautiful. Their emerald green surface was smooth and shiny. They hung from the ceiling in jagged points where they had split and chipped when these caverns were being formed. These jagged rocks appeared to be sharp enough to carve off bone. Acting upon an impulse, I ran one of my fingers along the edge of one of these rocks and winced as the fresh drop of bright red blood welled from the flesh part of my fingertip. I spotted something glittering in the path of my flashlight beam. It is a chunk of rock that must have been disturbed by something or someone. even though the sight of the bloody boots were not a good sign for Dr. Brown, but maybe he was still alive and he had disturbed the structure of the cave, causing the rock to fall. I slipped the rock into my pocket, thinking that I could make an interesting souvenir for my adventure before continuing on my way. As I climbed further and further down into the cave, the temperature dropped and I wrapped my arms around my body and shivered. The further I marched, the more and more tempting a nice warm fire seemed, until I finally caved in. I collected some scraps from the plants growing around the cave and climbed up to a high outcrop sticking out of the rocky wall. It would be a safe place if something were to come along the path or if a flood would sweep through the cave like it tends to do. I lit the vegetation with some matches I had in my pocket. The hungry tongues of the fire ran across the branches and lit them. In a minute the flames had developed into a roaring monster, and as I warmed my hands in its heat, my eyelids started to droop from exhaustion, and I found myself dozing off. I ended up drifting off in a deep sleep that I didn't know how long I was in for. I was startled by a deep, throaty growl emanating from the depth of the cave. My hands gripped around the rock in my pocket that I had first thought of nothing as a souvenir, but now that there was almost certainly something feral lurking around in the darkness, it might just save my life. As the moments passed, the growling grew louder and fiercer. As it grew in intensity, I was starting to debate whether I should turn around and tell Apex that I was unable to locate his cousin. However, he had made it quite clear that I wouldn't see a single penny of the 5-figure sum he was going to pay me if I failed now. So, with the fear of losing that money on my mind, I pushed forward towards the dying down growls. Maybe whatever it was had left the area and it was safer now, and my system started to calm down. A few hours passed, filled with uneventful travel, when I found my heart racing in my chest again. I had been stumbling along when the bottom of my shoe made contact with something tacky, and my foot stuck to the ground the next few steps I took. Totally disturbed and disgusted by the appearance of the new texture, I lifted my foot so I could inspect the bottom of my shoe with my flashlight. When I shined the beam of my flashlight towards the ground, the contents of my stomach almost exited my body. A few steps behind me, a ginormous puddle of blood had pooled into a divot in the ground and had started to congeal. Leading away from the puddle, a short, narrow path of footprints decorated the floor to where I was standing. I moved my light around the space to get a better sense of the situation. That is when I spotted the severed sleeve of a jacket lying bloodied and tattered on the ground. Just as my eyes landed on the gory morsel, out of nowhere the terrible growl echoed through the cave once more. However, this time it was even closer and more threatening than the first time. A burst of movement caught my attention from the corner of my eye. Frantically, I spun around to face the noise, and that is when it happened. My body did not have time to react. My brain did not have time to register the appearance of the creature that was now pinning me to the ground. So that was the story. I really love this one. I think it's a really fun adventure story. And if you want to figure out what happens next, again, head over to the Patreon and check out her video. So I finished cutting out all of my layers, and I'm really happy with how they turned out. It was a bit tedious to cut out, but it was worth it. And now I'm going to go and add some details onto this piece. I'm going to create a little trail going here, and I'm going to use a pin, I think, and poke some holes to make like a light trail. And then I'm going to add the character sitting up here on the cliff wall. So yeah. Alright, so now it's time to add some details and to create the private eye character investigating the cavern. For the path, I used just a pin, a push pin, sewing pin. They both work, and I just poke a bunch of holes along the little path that I designed. For this private eye character, I created the little campfire, and I wanted him hunched over, sitting warming his hands by it. I made the fire out of tracing paper, and sketching paper. I created his body out of cardstock, his face out of sketching paper, and I layered up a few things to get some more dimension. And then I wanted to add a little smoke trail leading off, so I cut a piece of sketching paper out and glued it in place to create the smoke. And now all of my layers are done and ready to assemble. For assembling, I'm cutting 1/2-inch thick strips of foam board and gluing them on the back side of each layer. So here I have all of my layers cut and I have the foam board glued onto the back side of them. They're all right here. Now to assemble this, you want to just take each layer, you have the foam board stuck on the back, then you just put some Elmer's glue, stack it, Elmer's glue, stack, until the whole thing is glued together. I'm really excited to see it lit up. I think I'm gonna either do like a teal or green or yellow light, or maybe a combination. I might do like a few different colors. So yeah, I'm going to put it into my box and then light it up. And here is the finished product. I love this piece. I love the depth. I don't know how to explain it, but I just love the shape of the tunnel. If you enjoyed this video, please consider checking out my other videos or my Patreon. I'll have the link down below. And yeah, I'll see you guys in 2 weeks.